So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming back. This is our sixth session, which is focused on mobilizing investment in nature-based solutions for water security, with a focus in the EU Eastern Area Partnership region. My name is Sophie Trémollet. I'm the water team lead at the OECD, and I'm very pleased to be here with you today. I'm joined by a very distinguished sort of panel, and we have Karin Zornberger, who is working for DG Environment, Aaron Vermeulen from the World WWF, and then Ala, who is from IUCN, who has been working with us on preparing the very interesting background paper that I invite you to all look at for this session. Because let's not forget that, you know, we get together in a room, but there's a lot of work that has been going into the preparation for those sessions, and you can read more about it, about the approach that is underlying the session in this paper. We will also have Stephen Hart, who is joining us online from the European Investment Bank, who's been working for some time on water, including also on other natural capital through the Natural Capital Financing Facility that was run by the European Investment Bank for a little while. So I think the previous session made our life a little bit easier because we had a lot of interest that sprung from the room for nature-based solutions and how, in particular, we can integrate them with grey infrastructure through the design of river basin management plan. So as in guise of introduction, I will just go over, a very brief presentation to discuss a little bit more what we mean by nature-based solutions and how they can be integrated into grey and green infrastructure programs. So as we heard, there was a very interesting question about the river basin management plan for Romania. Where are your nature-based solutions in that plan? Because effectively what we are realizing is that we're all looking for stronger water security, but that water security is multifaceted, and it depends very strongly on having resilient freshwater ecosystems that can produce the type of ecosystem services that we're looking for. So achieving water security cannot be done just through investment in traditional grey infrastructure, in pipes, transfers, treatment plants, etc. But what we need to do is also look at factors of degradation in the landscape that may be coming from degradation of these freshwater ecosystems and therefore need a different type of response. The type of challenges that we can tackle through nature-based solutions would be three of the main challenges, except access perhaps, but three of the main challenges that many of your countries face, which is the fact that water is too polluted, that there's too little water or too much water. And a lot of the factors impacting these challenges, if you want, are natural in nature. So investing in nature is a way of tackling those. So what do we mean by nature-based solutions? There are multiple approaches. These are just examples, but we will hear more through our speakers. Could be protecting forests, planting trees, improving agricultural practices, restoring river systems, protecting and restoring wetlands. And as one of the previous speakers mentioned, there are two ways of conceiving how to integrate nature-based solutions into your program of measures and investments. They can either be an add-on to an existing built system. So, for example, if you have a wastewater treatment plant and you decide to build a treatment wetland downstream from the treatment plants so that effectively it cleans the water, it polishes the water before it goes back into the ecosystem. That's just an example. Or you may, and this is where you can have greatest gains in terms of cost efficiency and reduction in overall cost. You may want to have a more intentional approach to investing in nature-based solutions, so that they can be integrated into a new or growing development. So you can really see whether or not there are savings that can be achieved. Nature-based solutions have been defined by the IUCN, and we'll hear more from Alain on the standard, are measures that are aimed at protecting, conserving, restoring, sustainably using and managing the ecosystems in a way that generates benefits both for biodiversity but also for human use, if you want, human well-being. So it's important to bear in mind that they need to have both of these impacts at the same time. And in terms of water security, there are many of these solutions that can be deployed, and in the discussion we'll aim to look at what could be particularly relevant in the countries that we are talking about today. But effectively, they can be built, they can be grouped into 4 main categories, either protecting existing ecosystems, and it's usually the most cost-efficient way to deliver benefits, because it's always better to protect what exists rather than restore what has already been degraded. So that would include building, establishing national parks, but also ensuring that they're not just paper parks, that they can be effectively managed. Someone talked about maintenance of NBS earlier, making sure that you have adequate resources, human resources, financial resources to ensure that they're adequately protected. Restoration is the next part, where you're looking at restoration of forests, but also prairies, wetlands, and floodplain restoration, invasive species removal. We could include dam removal as well, barrier removal in this category. So when we're looking at making sure that we restore continuity of rivers, one of the big objectives of the nature restoration law for Europe that is under discussion. We then have a third category that looks at management practices, both agricultural practices, but also forestry management practices, grazing practices, a whole range of practices. And then the last category that we often start with is the creation of nature-based solutions. So creation of new ecosystem, construction of wetlands. We heard the example of Austria that mentioned, the very many constructed wetlands that are, operating already in Austria. So I think we're going to talk about this whole range of solutions today, and really try to get into the heart of the debate to see what could be done, but also, most importantly, how they can be financed. And as we know, and it's been alluded to earlier, nature-based solutions can generate multiple benefits for these 3 main challenges I highlighted. So water quality, too much, too little water. But in a way, why they're attractive is because they can generate many other benefits in terms of biodiversity conservation, climate adaptation, climate mitigation, and also very importantly in terms of jobs and social cohesion, because these are jobs in the parts that you need the most, often in rural areas, that can create these jobs that are important, that can also promote urban and rural solidarity. There were questions about payment for ecosystem services. This is typically a way of getting, downstream beneficiaries to pay for an improvement in the upper watershed, for example. So this is a way of promoting urban-rural solidarity, because you can effectively pay through a water tariff downstream for investing in improvement of agricultural practices upstream, for example. So it's important to think of those aspects as well. But as a result, they're in some way victims of their own success, because given that they generate a whole range of benefits, these benefits would accrue to multiple beneficiaries. And so I've just mentioned the case of downstream beneficiaries. That could be the case of water utilities, for example, that benefit from improved peatland restoration upstream, which means that they can reduce their treatment cost, or they could benefit from reduction of erosion upstream, which would reduce turbidity at the level of a treatment plant and therefore be very attractive from that point of view. But there are other entities that can benefit. Corporates that use a lot of water downstream may have a very similar interest to these water utilities. Farmers and landowners may themselves benefit from the nature-based solutions, particularly if it can increase yields or if it can mean that they can retain greater amounts of water and therefore address issues of scarcity or drought. So the fact that there are all these beneficiaries also is associated with a multiplicity of revenue streams. So we talked about payment for ecosystem services. There might be environmental tariffs that are included in the tariffs. What we see, and that's what we will discuss, is often it's funded through quite a large amount of public subsidies, but there could be also commercial revenues. So if you have better managed forests, for example, you could increase your ability to generate income from forest management. Or if you have a protected area, there could be visitor fees and ecotourism and all associated revenues. So I think one of the key challenges is to see how can we make sure that these revenue streams are mobilized, are joined up. How can we make sure that some of these benefits are monetized as well? Because in some cases, this is accounted for in an economic analysis, but it's hard to monetize. So all of these questions I'll pose to our panel of distinguished speakers, and I will invite our first speaker to come and talk to us from a European Commission's perspective. What has been your take on nature-based solutions? You're a biologist by training, so that has been something that has been obviously close to your heart. But if you could tell us a little bit more about how the European Union is promoting the use of nature-based solutions and what has been your experience to date. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this kind first invitation and really nice introduction. I have prepared a few slides which very much in line with the question I have been just given. We try to look here at from gray to green how we actually can promote nature-based solutions for water, and in particular what can we actually learn from the European Union, what are the experiences in there. Now before doing this, I would never one word on the definition. You've mentioned the IUCN's definition, and actually the World Union moved forward based on the IUCN's definition, which was adopted in the World Conservation Congress 2016, together on site in 2022 at the 5th United Nations Environmental Assembly. All countries agreed on what nature-based solutions are. So I try to point this out because it really provides the clarity so that we cannot, because there has been a tendency to label many measures nature-based solutions even though they were negative for people, negative for biodiversity. Now with this multilaterally agreed definition, there is true clarity amongst all countries on what nature-based solutions are. And the UNEA resolution not only gives this definition, but it also provides a framing of the concept. It makes it very clear that these activities, they need to follow social, to respect social and environmental safeguards. And it also makes it very, very clear that nature-based solutions are not a panacea. During all these discussions, many people have said, oh, well, now you want to solve everything with nature. No, 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 no. Nobody has ever said this, but nature-based solutions are a very necessary, a crucial element in the overall bouquet. But of course, we need technological and nature-based and societal solutions to address this planetary emergency we are in that is caused by interdependent climate change and biodiversity loss that also has enormous impacts on the water, which is the main topic of our conference here. And I'm happy to say that this multilaterally agreed definition since then, it was in 2022, has been recognized in a number of conventions, including the UNFCCC, the CBD, the CCD, also the Ramsar Convention. And it also, if you follow a bit on what when business invest in nature-based solutions, at least on their websites, they do make references to this multilaterally agreed definitions, which means nature-based solutions are actions to protect, conserve, restore, sustainably use and manage ecosystems. In EU, my question, now I come back to my question. Now what, in the EU actually, we have been implementing nature-based solutions really for quite some time, But we have been quite creative when it comes to terms. We have, for example, notably in the water sector, the term, maybe some of you know, are familiar with it, natural water retention measures. There's a whole activity on that, in particular in the flood domain. Then as part of the biodiversity strategy up to 2020, there was a green infrastructure strategy, meaning putting emphasis about on the spatial planning, being the plan that you have to really make sure that you can harness the ecosystems, the services that you can harness from healthy ecosystems. And then in the debate of disaster risk reduction, ecological disaster risk reduction, in the debate of climate change adaptation. Now all these different concepts are in reality not different concepts, because they all share in common this idea that we work with nature for people, or to be fully precise, we work with nature, with people, and I come to that, and working for people and for nature. So you do not try to fight nature, but you really use nature as the ally. And actually, when it comes to climate change adaptation and mitigation, I mean, nature is and has been our strongest ally. But now, as we see nature, biodiversity loss eroding, ecosystems degrading, we really need to actively protect, restore, sustainable use, and manage, implement nature-based solutions, harness the benefits, including for the water sector, for water quality and water quantity, as has been very well explained before. Now, I'd like to insist on the working with nature. Nature-based solutions are a holistic approach that really needs transdisciplinary collaboration amongst different sectors, and also participatory approaches, meaning people now, here we have gathering on water sector, but it's really useful if we manage to make bridges also to these other sectors which actually benefit from nature-based solutions. And then we also should really see the value of investment, because we will harness the multiple benefits or the multiple co-benefits, as has been mentioned. Although personally I mean, when we speak about main and co-benefits, you always think there is a main and a co, but as a matter of fact, if we protect, restore the ecosystems, they will deliver all these ecosystem services for water, but also for health, for climate, for people, for job. So it's really, we can get, through investment in nature-based solutions, we really can have these outfits on biology, on sociology, and also on economical issues. The job and business opportunities is very important, because the implementation of nature-based solutions, of course, it needs many hands, it needs many different professions, from hand labor, skilled labor, thinking labor, artificial intelligence, really everything. And the beauty is trying to work together in a transdisciplinary way. On the other hand, the measures we've seen, protection, restoration of ecosystems, we've done this for a long time, but we need to do it more. So we can really draw on a wealth of really experience, which we have and experience about in the European Union, through also the implementation of the nature directives, the implementation of the water directives. So we really have a whole wealth of experience. And as has already been mentioned, in the research framework programs, notably the Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe, I mean, the European Union has kind of invested $500 million into demonstration and development of nature-based solutions in the very different sectors, and several of them really go clearly, I mean, focus on the water sector. So, I mean, these approaches, of course, do we know everything? Certainly not. Are there still gaps? Certainly yes. But there's really a wealth of knowledge which we can build on, accelerate, and multiply. And as we are in this, I call it planetary emergency, so the important is now to accelerate the action on the ground. Yes. Quick, I will be finished. Sorry, I'm getting a bit carried away, because I think this is such an important topic. And from grey to green, this is our key. So you already mentioned there's also hybrid solutions, so we must not be ideological, only grey or only green. Really try to work together. And there's one really big argument in favor of the green infrastructure. Why? Because the ecosystems, for example, floodplains, while they cannot prevent the extreme events, that would be too nice, but they will always buffer. They may eventually let the water in, but they will always buffer. Whereas a grey infrastructure, if you do not have the exact knowledge, I mean, how high your storm surge will be, the grey infrastructure actually can really exacerbate the problem. So that's one what we should have in mind, in particular in these times where we still have quite some uncertainty. And I can actually skip that because it was already been said that ecosystems are essential for water quantity and quality. So implementation of nature-based solutions is actually part of our best life insurance, I would say. And we will come to this. This is the topic of our session here, finance for nature-based solutions. So we will probably hear about the difficulty for bankable projects because the valuation of all these services is sometimes complicated. That means probably also we should think, put our best fingers on how can we actually adapt also the system to enable the recognition of non-monetary benefits. Then this will open a flood of implementation investment in nature-based solutions. And we also have to think beyond the narrow growth paradigm. That was something already included in the IPBES global assessment adopted in 2019. And of course, let's not forget, we have a whole bouquet of instruments. In the previous sessions, I think you learned a lot about different instruments, so we should use them all. And by using them all, we will then eventually get into the positive spiral. We have strong emission reduction, we will have protection, restoration of ecosystems, and then we'll keep our climate and biodiversity targets, and we'll find a sustainable, carbon neutral, equitable society and economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karin. So we'll move to our next speaker, Ala Al-Dawiri, who's a natural infrastructure officer working on water and wetlands in IUCN. So could you tell us a little bit more about, how the IUCN has conceived the standard for nature-based solutions, and what has been your experience of how this has been applied in the region, in particular, because you were one of the key authors behind the paper, which again I'm encouraging you to take a look at because it has a lot in there. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you, Sophie. So about the IUCN standard, the IUCN global standard for MBS is a facilitative standard. And what I mean by that, it's a standard that you can use for the design, the assessment, and as well for scaling up nature-based solution. And in its current edition, we have 8 criteria and 28 indicators. But these 8 criteria and 28 indicators can be used and applied in numerous contexts. You can use it to support policy development. You can use it as well to support financial decision-making when it comes to investing in NBS. And of course, it's revised every 4 years, and the next version will be published next year in 2025 with the IUCN Conservation Congress. In terms of how it came together, so these 8 criteria and 28 indicators, of course, came after an in-depth gap analysis that was done as the basis for the first operational framework for MBS, which resulted in the publication of the standard in 2020. And that came in through the contribution of more than 1,000 experts that are working in different sectors, including engineering, ecology, social sciences. And of course, the standard benefited from open consultation sessions too, in particular, where we received more than 800 comments coming in from 100 different countries, all of which were incorporated back into making the final version of the criteria and the indicators. In terms of its applicability, of course, the standard is open access. It's freely available online. Anybody can access it and use it. And it's designed, of course, to be used by individuals, to be used by local governments, to be used by donors, by investors. You can use it when you are trying to design your nature-based solution from scratch. If you have a solution that is already designed and you want to assess and monitor it, as well if you have a proposal for a certain project or intervention and you want to see if it's appropriate to make that investment, the standard can help in that. And this comes through 3 different levels. The first one, at its core, it's the standard itself, and it gives you a very brief description of each of the criteria and its indicators. So, for example, and this is something that already Karen touched upon, we have 8 criteria. The first one focuses on societal challenges, and it has a series of indicators that you need to go through and answer what kind of societal challenges are being addressed by that solution. Is it one? Is it multiple? How do they interact together? Another criteria looks at design at scale, and this is meant to help the individual or the local government to look at the most suitable scale to design your MBS, how it would operate at a larger scale, at a smaller scale. Of course, other criteria focuses on economic viability, social inclusivity, adaptive management, and many others. And the second component is the guidance, and the guidance is more of a technical document that gives you further detailed definition of each of these criteria and each of these indicators, and helps the person to understand how to set specific targets and thresholds for each of these indicators. And this was mostly done in an Excel-based environment, but just recently, 2 months ago, IUCN launched our NBS self-assessment tool, which is again open access and freely available online, and you can go into that tool and register your MBS intervention or project and go through these criteria and indicators. And at the end, you're going to be left with a final assessment, a report that tells you what is the level of adherence of that specific intervention or specific project towards the NBS global standard for MBS. So that could be strong adherence, it could be adequate, insufficient, partial. And at the end, that should be used as a foundational piece, because if you want to invest in a certain solution, but you can see that it has strong adherence to the standard, that more or less gives you the idea that it meets these 8 criteria, it meets these indicators, and it will most probably have high potential to deliver on the intended outcomes and services of that specific intervention. Therefore, investing in it could be a good solution. On the other hand, if you only have like partial or insufficient adherence to the standard, then you know that there are certain gaps, certain strengths and weaknesses within that design that need to be enhanced. So overall, I think it's a very good starting point when individuals, donors, local governments are looking at financing or implementing certain NBS solution. But of course, you really need to use this tool while keeping the integrity of the implementation of such solutions, by keeping in mind that we really need to acknowledge that the delivery of services when it comes to NBS does take time, and the thresholds of that delivery is still unclear when compared to the ones of traditional gray infrastructure, and that could lead to lower levels of social acceptance. So really acknowledging that when you're doing that type of work is quite important, because if there is a certain flooding risk or event and you want to mitigate that, local governments or local communities will always favor traditional gray infrastructure, installing a new embankment that they know it will deliver and protect them against the flooding. When you go and try to explain why is it important to change the land management practices in that area, and how on the long term that will actually reduce your risk to flooding in a much higher manner. So really understanding and acknowledging that the delivery of services takes time, and as well acknowledging that we do need a transitional period. We cannot just go directly to nature-based solution. You do need to have projects that allows you to join the two things together. You could implement gray and nature-based solution just to make sure that you are building towards that social acceptance and you're reducing the risk, basically, of investment in nature-based solutions. So.
Thank you. So, in your opinion, do you think that adherence to the standard would increase the opportunity to access funding or financing? What? You know, what does it change from the point of view of an implementer? How much effort should they put into adhering to the standard in some way?
So it's not. I think there isn't a lot of effort, in my opinion. And there is at the same time, because you do have many indicators that really touches upon these different issues, that makes sure that your NBS really focuses on societal challenges and focuses on being economically viable. So it's not actually adhering to the standard itself. We want to see it as a checklist that makes sure that the person who's designing, the technical person, the local government who's implementing, the financer who's putting their money, they're putting in something that's going to actually deliver. So it's not really to adhere to the standard. If it doesn't adhere, our whole idea is just to give you that feedback to know what are the gaps, what are the weaknesses, and where you can implement. And again, this is like, it's open access, it's a free tool to be used to do that assessment. So there isn't a gain or a financial gain on everything when it comes to the adherence. It's more of you understanding really where does your nature-based solution fall on that spectrum.
Yeah, and it really helps you frame your thinking as well, no? In terms of ensuring that
exactly.
it's designed in the adequate manner.
So exactly, like the whole idea is to make sure that your intervention takes into consideration societal challenges. It can be designed at scale. It's economically viable. It's adaptive. It's socially inclusive. So all of these criteria is just to make sure that you're really investing in something that is sustainable long term.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and if we pivot to the region, so you've done this work through a series of workshops in the different countries that we are discussing today. If you could tell us maybe a little bit more about your case study in Georgia, because you looked in detail at how NBS could be complementary of the measures that are in River Basin Management Plan, and that was one of the discussion points that we had earlier, in the case of Romania. So from your examination of this case, what do you think could be cost-effective NBS that are included in that example? Where do you think the cost-effectiveness could stem from integrating NBS?
Okay, so as IUCN, we did a study with OECD, and that looked at the potential for deploying nature-based solution within Eastern Partnership countries. And in the second half, we particularly looked at the Alazani-Ayori Basin in Georgia, because there was already a drafted river basin management plan and very well-defined basic measures and secondary measures within that basin. So one of the first things to look at is really the amount of challenges that exists. Just looking at that one basin, you can see that there are challenges with point source pollution coming from the release of untreated wastewater. You have diffuse source pollution coming from agriculture. You have hydrological issues coming in from the over-abstraction of or high withdrawals of water for agriculture, and as well for hydropower. You have geomorphological issues, which is coming in from the presence of the sand and gravel mining industry within that basin. And as well, on top of that, you have climate risks and stressors with time that's going to affect the basin. So from our analysis, we saw that already the basic measures are trying to really take into consideration all of the challenges through a great infrastructure. So one of the main challenges was the implementation of a wastewater treatment plan. But definitely when you look at that, you see that the best solution would be to use NBS as complementary solutions within the basic measures. So you don't have, you leave the program of measure as it is. It's great, it's tackling all of these issues, but then you do need NBS to complement all of these challenges, and as well, so you could have, because of the high level of pollution, you do need a wastewater treatment plan. You cannot just not do it. So you do need it. But again, you can use constructed wetlands. You need to solve the issue with diffuse water pollution. So you need to fix your already existing irrigation network, which is great infrastructure. But then you can use vegetative channels and buffers to make sure that you're reducing the pollution that is happening there. But one thing to look at and to make sure that NBS is really deployable in that context is that you want to follow a multi-sectoral approach to the design of NBS, because I've mentioned there are many actors and there are many people that are benefiting from that basin. You have people in the agricultural sector, you have people in the gravel and mining industry, you have utility companies, you have people in hydropower that are all benefiting from the natural resources within that basin, and therefore any kind of nature-based solution really needs to be designed with this cross-sectoral approach in mind, that you tailor your solution to water management issues, but then you make sure that there are biodiversity net gain, you make sure that there are climate benefits. And why is that important? Because it allows you to tap into all of these different funds. So there could be a fund that is just focusing on net gain and biodiversity, one that is just focusing on climate benefit, one is the, so if you really tailor your solution, you can tap into more of these funds and make sure that the applied NBS is successful. And maybe just one final point is that we are really holding NBS to a very high standard, because if you think of gray infrastructure, it was never asked to deliver on all of these, like this holistic approach and this collective solution to all of these issues together. It was always asked to deliver on one solution, and which it did successfully for most of the time, but not not so often. And it's good to take into consideration that really MBS is being asked a lot to follow these holistic approaches to mitigate all of these challenges.
Thank you. And so, as you said, it does generate multiple benefits, and the funding, the nature of the funding is quite fragmented, which makes it difficult for financiers to come forward with finance. And so, in fact, we have online, I'll go to our online speaker now, Stephen Hart, who's a senior loan officer at the EIB and financial advisor. So Stephen has worked on the water sector for a very long time, but also was leading on the natural capital financing facility of the EIB. So Stephen, if you, I know the EIB has looked into these different financing models across Europe in order to understand how this has been done, where are the experiences of pulling funds together, setting sort of governance and funding platforms to facilitate financial flows to these solutions. Could you tell us a little bit more about the findings of these reports, what you find particularly enlightening and inspiring for audience today?
Yes, so thank you very much. So yes, I'm Stephen Hart. I work for the EIB, that's the European Investment Bank, advisory services, and my remit is mainly around biodiversity, water, and climate adaptation. And indeed, last year, in June last year, about a year ago, we produced a report which tried to summarize our own experiences in the field of natural capital financing and MBS. It summarized 7 years of the natural capital financing facility, which was a cooperation with the European Commission, where we tried to deploy repayable finance for nature and nature-based climate adaptation. But we also did a very large survey of project developers, financiers, operators in the market around MBS to see where they were at in their thinking and what their appetite was. But we started with sort of a major survey really of what is out there, what projects are say termed NBS, and which are the most important ones. And I encourage anyone to read the report. If you just Google EIB NBS, it should pop up, and it's a good primer. It's actually not a bad place to start also if you're looking at this area. So what we did is we looked at basically Europe as a landscape, and we tried to divide it into a number of, say, a taxonomy of landscapes. So we had agriculture, forestry, wetlands, and so on. And within those, we tried to examine who the stakeholders are and what they're doing. One interesting thing is that when you look at NBS, nature-based solutions, the definitions are not super sharp. And when you start looking at what is the potential for MBS, you start to move in the direction of what is really the full ecosystem restoration potential, in fact, in that landscape. Because, MBS happens at local, bigger and national, even global scale. So there's it kind of those two terms. The higher up, you might say, the landscape you work, the more interchangeable they become, ecosystems and MBS. So it will become as no surprise, really, that the main source of funding is really from the public side. That's from the EU and national funds. That isn't necessarily a completely accurate picture, because many public sector entities also get their financing off the private capital market. So if you ultimately trace where the money's coming from, there are only a few sources, it's taxes and revenues. So, but say the number of actual private investors who are looking for a private return on nature investments, MBS, are very limited. In fact, only about 3%, according to our statistics. Now, there is one sector that actually receives a very large amount of funding in Europe in principle, for nature activities, which is agriculture. but the way it is deployed, it's not tracked very well. So the outcomes are not well assessed. And the good side of this is that if those significant funding streams were actually deployed effectively, then agricultural funding would account for a very large amount of the funding needs actually for nature on agricultural space. And bear in mind, agriculture is half of Europe. So a lot of private investors are interested in this space, but they're not really committing. They're still standing pretty much on the edges and are curious. They're coming to terms with climate slowly, but nature is lagging behind. There are a couple of financial actors though that are ahead of the rest, and they, they're at least a decade ahead of the rest. So they're interesting partners to talk to. Generally, nature projects are small, which means the normal financial players find that very hard to deal with. Simply, the transaction costs in relation to their operations it's just doesn't work for them. Generally, the financial solutions for MBS are very varied. There's really no one size fits all. There are a lot of tailored solutions. There's also quite a lot of confusion about terminology, that people mix up, say, investors with donors and say funding with financing. And for us, we try to separate these concepts very clearly. So financing is something that's repayable, and funding is not repayable. So funding are other revenues and say donations of some sort. And it's important because it brings into focus that dealing with MBS is ultimately a funding issue, not primarily a financing issue. It's actually very hard, to get, when you invest, say, or if you into nature-based solutions of nature, to get it back in a private profit sense, because a lot of it is public goods. You do something for nature, and in fact, very often you can't stop others from using it. And if people use it, it doesn't make it less usable for others. So there are a lot of public good features that are fundamental. But what underneath that, though, there's a very important, useful message, though, is that some sectors are just strategically aligned with nature and nature-based solutions. And these are, for example, the water sector and forestry, for example. They have the time frames. They are inherently, in their planning frameworks, they have long-term views. So in their investment planning and financial planning, they take a long-term view which sort of matches with natural processes. And they have the footprint, the size, the control of a land. They have sanitary protection zones. They have rights in catchments. And if you look at the water sector, it stands out because there is simply a visceral, an innate connection between us as water drinkers and consumers and the idea of nature. So it's actually very easy for water companies to engage in these kind of activities and even pass costs onto the customers. And in fact, within Europe, the Water Framework Directive is actually very explicit about that. So these kind of catchment activities, environmental and resource costs, can be put on the water bill, and it's a very natural place to put them. It doesn't always take place, but it certainly is.
Stephen, you're running out of time, so yeah.
Okay, I'll be very quick then. So the important thing is to understand that the water sector is so integrated into landscapes. It's a small part of a bigger natural water cycle. It's also integrated in long-term urban planning, which is why we see water companies as playing a key facilitating role in both areas.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. You spoke to the predominantly public funding nature of a funding flows and the limited involvement of private finance. So I'm going to turn now to Aaron Vermeulen, who is the lead on finance for WWF, but your heart is in water, and we hope to keep you there for some time, that you don't get too distracted with other things. I'd like to ask you about your experience of setting up platforms such as the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development that are looking to attract a broader mix of funding and financing sources for these solutions. If you could speak to your experience in the water sector primarily and how this could inspire the audience here.
Yeah, Thanks, Sophie, and good morning, everyone. Well, actually, it's quite a personal story as well, because I started with water, and then I moved to finance, and actually that's also how the history of the DFCD, which I will tell you a little bit later about, went. So WWF has been trying to protect, restore, manage freshwater ecosystems for more than 6 decades. And well, it was about 15 years ago that the freshwater team in WWF said, well, actually the speed at which we are successful is not at the pace with the speed with which these freshwater ecosystems are going down. So we need to change our game. So then we were thinking, okay, how can we bring the people that are impacting and are depending on these freshwater ecosystems, the private sector to a large extent, how can we bring them into the game? So then we coined this whole concept of water stewardship. So how can you, Alas gave a nice example in Georgia, how can you bring these private sector actors that are working, producing, providing services in these river basins, how can you bring them together, make them aware of the value of these nature-based solutions, but also of the risks, right? So what can they do individually within their fence line? What can they do collectively? But also how can then they push the governments to act on stuff they can't do on their own? And then I'm not talking about not only the Ministry of Environment or water, but also finance, right? Because what the Ministry of Finance doesn't always see is that these companies represent a lot of GDP and jobs, right? So we tested this water stewardship approach in Zambia, not in Europe, sorry, but that's just the starting point, where we were working in a huge wetland. It's called the Kafue Flats, and it's upstream of the capital, the size of about Belgium. Economically very important because it's providing half of the electricity for the country and half of the water supply for the capital. But a lot of companies operating around that wetland, so beef, sugar, hydropower, metals, all kinds of industry. So they, over the years, they have been degrading that wetland, which risks the wetland not to play that role as a nature-based solution, right? So sucking up the water in the wet season and releasing it in the dry season. So what we did is we set up a platform with all the private sector players and said, okay, guys, you're at risk here. Listed companies that are dependent on the water resource, not really being aware of what needs to be done. So we developed this joint action coalition, and then at one point we came to a moment where they said, okay, we want to scale a transition to more sustainable production, but we need investments, and where's the money? And that actually coincided with a big tender of the Dutch government, 200 million tender for the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, which was really trying to crowd in private sources for climate mitigation and adaptation. So we, WWF, another NGO, SNV, more working on the agricultural side, set up a consortium with FMO, Development Bank, climate fund managers, private equity fund, to really look at, okay, how can you then do that? And I think the DFCD has 3 unique things that I haven't seen a lot in the rest of the world. Well, for starters, it's working globally in OECD DAC countries. So we're not particularly tied to a region or a country, we work everywhere. We are a consortium of non-financial and financial institutions, so we try to understand each other's world. So what is bankable? Bankable from the private side, but also what is impact and what is climate adaptation and what are nature-based solutions from the other side. So I think over the years we started to talk each other's language. But also, out of that 200 million, 70 million went to the 2 NGOs to really manage these basin processes and get the private sector actors together. That's one. But also support individual companies to build the business case. So how can you then produce more sustainably? How can you do sustainable agriculture where you retain more water in the soil? Or how can you change your irrigation methods? Wastewater treatment, energy production. So all these kind of pressures on that nature-based solutions could be addressed by these individual private sector companies. And so that origination part is really important, but also that landscape vision, right? So because what we want to avoid is that we're sticking plazas. Okay, here we have one private company that has a financial transaction, and then you move on to another landscape without the total problem not being addressed. So we're staying around. So the DCD currently is in operation for 4 years. We mobilized 1.3 billion private money. And
can you tell us a bit more about the private? That was going to be my question. You know, the private money is for DCFD as a whole, not just for Zambia, right?
Right. So
right.
It's all over the world.
Yeah.
So we have a
so
pipeline.
What sort of sources of private funding have you been able to mobilize?
So what normally is happening? So the 200 million was partly used for origination done by the NGOs, but also de-risking by the development bank and the private equity firm. So with that money, we could crowd in commercial finance from local commercial banks, global pension funds, because the climate fund managers, they set up a Climate Investor 2, which is a water fund, and they crowded in institutional money from Europe to invest in the Global South in water-related projects. So yeah, that in a nutshell is what we did in the past year. And I think what is nice, I see a lot of replication of these platforms or facilities all over the world. Just at the end of my water career, I worked with the Dutch government on an initiative called Water as a Leverage. Monica is in the room. She was involved, or she already left, which was really also looking at city-wide investment plans and using water as a designing principle, but then also how could you look at public-private sources to fund these individual projects.
Okay. Thank you. Well, you mentioned at the end of your water career, but you're stuck. You're not escaping.
I'm here again.
Because, as you said, water is a connector, right? So you always dabble with water in whatever you do. Okay, well, thanks a lot, everybody, for this first round of comments. I'd like to invite questions from the audience. Yes, down. Got one here and then one right at the back.
Yeah, sure. Set? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I have a small comment on what Allah has presented. First of all, we are delighted to hear that someone other than basin stakeholders, beneficiaries and developers have read this Alazani-Iori River Basin Plan, which is a surprise to me, and it's very good. You are right about the lack of nature-based solutions in this report, other than small hedges for the protection of pollution from agriculture. However, there was another small study funded by the World Bank for the Iori River, where the team tried to address pollutions and extraction of the sand and ground extraction from the Iori River with nature-based solutions. And I think it was a very good example, maybe pioneer in this regard for this basin. And we are ready to share this report, of course. And by the way, we are currently working on the 2 more river basin planning for the western part of Georgia. And once it is ready, we could also share with you to see if something is missing or could be added from your side. And one small example for the nature-based solutions, by the way, a pioneer of the constructed wetland is being now developed in the town of Hashuri with the help of AFD, which is, I think, also a good deal for Georgia. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that was, the point of the study was more of a pilot analysis, let's say, that IUCN did in collaboration with OECD, because we do see that the river basin management plans are really a good opportunity and a stepping stone to incorporate NBS into these basins, because you already put a lot of effort and money and resources and time into making these plans. So really it's important to align that with nature-based solution and make it more operational. So hopefully, I think Matthew can highlight on that, but it can definitely be replicated in other basins to see what kind of nature-based solution can be incorporated into the programs of basic measures.
Thank you. There was a question right at the back. Yeah, we'll take a couple of questions and then we'll answer them together. So
thank you very much.
Yeah, it's okay.
It's my to ask a question. Okay,
yeah.
Thank you very much. So my question is, last year we had a meeting in a remote part of the country, and one farmer, he told, okay, it's very nice that we have a drought management program, and how can I benefit from it now? So my question is, are there some mechanisms which could help to communities and to stakeholders to have a quick response to the actions which they have to implement just now in order to save the harvest or to improve the life in the communities and so on, based on ecosystem services and nature-based solutions. They say that the situation often is so urgent that they need very quick response. So what could be proposed to have a quick response based on nature-based solutions and ecosystem services? Thank you. So what mechanism, I mean, what financial mechanisms could be used in order to have quick response on concrete needs of communities? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'll go to the lady at the back. If you could introduce yourself when you ask a question as well. Sorry, gentlemen, you're from...
So my name is Dumitru Drumea. I'm from Moldova, but actually I represent Civil Society Forum of the Eastern Partnership. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Darshini. I'm from the International Water Management Institute. Question is, I guess at a policy level, how do we manage trade-offs of NBS solutions with competing solutions for sometimes, for climate adaptation, for instance, subsidies? And if I can sneak in another quick question. Yesterday we spoke a little bit about newer innovative financing mechanisms, such as carbon markets, for instance. So what is the sort of appetite for looking at debt for nature swaps and other financing solutions in Europe? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, Christopher? Yeah. Oh, okay, down here. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Guy Allarts from IHE Delft in the Netherlands. Nature-based solutions are, by definition, multi-sectoral. That has been alluded already to by Ala. But what is your guidance when it comes to resolving the tension or the competition between different sectors? For example, between, if you want to restore a wetland for flood protection, then you basically prevent the local government of building houses there. So there is this continuous trade-off between different interests, and especially in EAP, just like in the Balkans, no river is national. So there are then trade-offs between, say, hydropower ministry in one country with agriculture, flood protection in the other country. So what is your guidance on how to approach it? And actually, in some cases, there is not much trade-off, like around a city in an urban setting. You have the mayor or the whatever who can take decisions. Mm-hmm. But how to deal with the bigger picture where you do have these trade-offs. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Christopher, yeah.
Yeah, Christopher Gass on Global Water Intelligence. I'm just wondering why you think nature-based solutions have been slow to take off, given that they're so obviously a good idea. Is it because of ignorance, or people don't like the idea? Is it because the assets and the activities are beyond the control of the beneficiaries? Is it because there's no tangible revenue stream in most cases? Or is it because actually you need an NGO like World Wildlife Fund or TNC to come in to bring those stakeholders together, and for some reason governments are less good at doing that?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think we'll move to the answers, and perhaps I'll use my prerogative as, from my own experience, right? Because I was working on developing those schemes. You talked about trade-offs between these priorities. In fact, what we find is that sometimes in the UK, for example, it's local governments that have asked for nature-based solutions to be developed in order to unlock housing. Because effectively nitrates have reached such a high level that they need to have ways of taking nitrogen from the environment so that they can unlock additional housing growth. So these can be complementary when in the landscape the ecosystems are so degraded that you need those solutions in order to be able to move forward with a more sustainable pattern of growth. And then to the constraints, Christopher, I would say, look at the report from Ala, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit more. I mean, there's a lot of documentation about challenges, but I think perhaps here, let's focus more on the solutions. And maybe I'll turn to who would like to answer that question about speed and what do you do urgently? Because as you mentioned, effectively NBS do take a lot of time to deliver benefits, so there is a time lag component. But is there anything that can be done using an NBS approach to tackle urgent issues? And what can be done also to anticipate further issues? It would be my complementary question. Okay.
No. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for the question. So I give it a try. I mean, in terms of for the quick help, I think perhaps here maybe lessons can be really drawn from the disaster risk reduction sector, which is solicited more and more and more, but their quick help is really of the essence. And when we speak about quick help, maybe there we should also not forget about grants, even small grants, which can help to really unlock the local potential. I know maybe as I look at the colleague of the EIB here, I know that for big institutions, I usually, also my own institutions, thinking, well, this is so much administration, but from the experience on the ground, very often this kind of also smaller project can then lead to bigger projects and so on. But important is to channel really the funds, just as you say, fast to where it's needed so that the action on the ground can actually start. The question came on competition. My recipe against this competition would really be, we need, as I tried to really insist on, we need this collaboration. So people need to get together, talk, communicate, discuss, and then once you find that we have actually our issues, all these emergencies we have are interdependent, interconnect, so they really also need a systemic answer. So we need to overcome competition. Competition cannot be the first driver. We need the solution, and the solution is really together in the collaboration. Why the slow takeoff? I mean, the person who asked this question almost answered it himself already. It's kind of a combination of all that, and again, I think what can help against it is really, it seems so banal, it seems so old, it seems so old-fashioned, but it's really the communication, the need about that really once you get into the implementation, your trade-offs, your big obstacles, your big barriers, they kind of vanish once you can actually see the first benefits. And I agree, it sometimes takes time, but sometimes the pure fact to work together, the pure fact to be part of the solution that you find, I mean, there's really many examples of, for example, the restoration project where really you give back hope for a whole region. So the the most important thing in my view is really get started. And here the whole, I mean, all sectors are really challenged to really make sure that we manage this quick takeoff.
And maybe Aaron, because just building on that, the question from Christopher is, do we always need an NGO? Do we always need, because you talked about collective action, right? You talk about the need to work together to overcome competition, but that takes work. That doesn't happen necessarily naturally. So the question back to you is do we always need this kind of intermediary to make it happen or not?
Well, I think the complex thing about nature, it's by definition, it concerns multiple stakeholders, right? So if you would be a private sector company operating in a river basin where you could actually change your business model that contributes to a nature-based solution, you need to talk to the government to get the licenses in place. You need to talk to local communities to make sure that they're not at risk or that they actually benefit from that intervention. You need to talk to NGOs to make sure that it's credible. So it requires multiple stakeholders. I'm not sure whether NBS by definition are slow in their response, because I have some examples where because an NGO like WWF or IUCN gets the right people on the table, it can go really quick.
So can you give us...
I give one example. So in the Netherlands, on the western side of the Netherlands, WWF had an idea to, together with a project developer, to repurpose agricultural land to build houses in the floodplain, but then also with the revenue of the sales of the houses, restore 80% of that agricultural land to the floodplain, which what originally was. But normally in Dutch legislation, repurposing, relabeling from agricultural to housing and nature takes years and years and years. But in this case, because all actors were lined up, it was a matter of a year. The houses were built in a couple of years, because that's not, and then the land was restored in the same amount of time. So, and that then also hedged local communities against floods, etc. So it can be done quickly, but I think it's not a linear investor-client relation, but it requires an ecosystem of different actors that are looking at the same targets.
Anna, maybe I'll turn to you. What about this point? I mean, I'm very sensitive to this point about urgency versus prevention, right? So, and there was a question online as well in terms of the relative costs of NBS versus grey infrastructure. How do these compare, and how can we build a more cost-efficient package of measures?
So perhaps in terms of urgency, it's really important, and as well for the specific case study in Georgia, is that at some point you do have to prioritize which challenges you want to go after first. And for example, in that specific basin, going after point source pollution from wastewater would make sense because it's easier to map out. You can find where are the areas that are causing pollution. You can start by fixing the network, and you can start by implementing constructed wetlands, for example. Although if you want to go after diffuse pollution, that is much more complicated because you really need to map out all of the agricultural activities and area and to properly define where is this pollution coming from. So at that specific case study, you really have to pick and prioritize the program of measures that you want to go after, and then attempt, as Karen mentioned, to go through grants and money that you can get quickly to implement such solutions. In terms of the coast. So definitely when you look at sustainable urban drainage systems, for example, that are mostly implemented in urban areas and now are being pioneered by the UK, Germany, and being standardized, you can see that the cost is immensely less when compared to grey infrastructure within cities, so really putting new channels or decks or so on compared to a green roof. Of course, at the beginning the investment is higher, but it takes time to maintain these solutions, but on the long term you are still delivering benefits that most probably grey infrastructure cannot if you get a higher surge of storm or precipitation, for example, in that specific scenario. But of course, the bigger the MBS, if you look at the Lower Danube restoration project and the amount of money that went into that. Of course, that is a very large-scale investment, but then that was for river restoration, and that was across multiple countries. So it really, the amount of cost that is associated with MBS really depends as well, largely on the scale. So the smaller the scale, you can get the results. It can be delivered fast. It can be delivered for much less cost than a typical gray infrastructure. But of course, the higher that you go, the more that you need.
Thank you. I'd like to ask a question to Stephen, who's been very patient with us online. What role do you see for the development finance institutions, and what has been your experience as EIB engaging? You've worked a lot in the region in looking to design sort of this package of investments, if you want, that could be financed through development finance lending or associated grant.
So, I mean, the way we view working with nature-based solutions is that it is a solution to a problem. So we're not likely to raise, the topic of biodiversity or nature as this conversation starter. And I think this is just at the heart of trying to integrate these ideas, that you really understand what the underlying problems are that you're trying to solve, and then you bring forward good solutions. I mean, nature-based solutions are supposed to be good solutions. So just try to emphasize that, that the entry point is understanding the needs. The other thing is that, we're also trying to bring a sense of familiarity, because it's very easy to get some idea or some very defensive reactions to these things. If people are not familiar with them, they think it's something very strange. And in fact, working with nature-based solutions, it comes down to just a pretty sound planning and design. So just emphasizing that it's still about some regular thinking about topography, about how you manage water in the landscape, just considering the landscape, right? Just trying to bring out about the basic ideas that can sink in, that that a lot of drought and flood situations are two sides of the same coin, which is land management, for example. So just that basic familiarity to get that underlined. And then another thing that we're doing actively now is trying to build up a set of say tools and principles, so that these aspects, nature and MBS, in a way, are taken into account properly in options analyses. So typically, I mean, the main blocking points among decision makers when it comes to even if there is an intention to want to do MBS, it's that MBS tends to lose in these options analyses. There's like an asymmetry with the more standard options. So to try to bring the data and the knowledge and understanding, really, so that we get a more balanced comparison. And it really, in that sense, also, there are a lot of underlying issues to do with land and landscapes and managing stakeholders, where, even in the EU, I think a lot of our promoters struggle with stakeholder engagement. And so we'll be trying to emphasize this point, because I think many solutions fail ultimately unless that is done properly and genuinely. I mean, we've talked about these trade-offs. I mean, in some cases, MBS is about just dismantling in totally inappropriate solutions that have failed. And very often when people come to us, it's because what they've done before has failed, and they're looking for something new, something that might be work in the future. So, yes, I mean, as IFIs, development institutions, ultimately we're asking people to borrow money. It's their own money they'll have to repay, and that's where we have to keep a focus on really what the needs are, and just to make sure that it gets done well and is well considered.
Thank you. We're reaching the end of our session, so yes, please go ahead. There's a question here, microphone.
Thanks a lot for this extremely interesting discussion. One aspect is that the grey infrastructure is a bit more one-dimensional, while the NBS is multi-dimensional, multi-benefit. But also the grey infrastructure needs quite some time to be prepared. So don't, let's say, misinterpret the need of an upfront wide stakeholder involvement that needs time and social balance and etc. Compared to a seemingly simple effort of realizing, for instance, a wastewater treatment plant or a flood protection measure. I would like to announce another publication that is coming up very soon from our program, mainly from our French colleagues, which is a catalogue of NBS for the implementation of river basin management plans, so the program of measures, which is looking at the starting from the pressures and then looking what kind of NBS exist, what kind of co-benefits they have, and what are the experiences, the case studies that exist, and further literature and experiences that are available. This is a toolkit, if you want, or an instrument for decision makers to find the appropriate type of NBS for a given situation, a local problem. And it will be released in a few weeks and, of course, shared with the participants of this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm really happy to see, this level of interest. I think we've had a very lively discussion about this topic. I think, as you pointed out, there's a lot more resources that are available even just a few years ago. Your question was, is it about ignorance? I think now there is a lot of documentation about experiences both in Europe, but also, in the US or in Zambia. We heard, really all around the world, we have a robust standard. We have a lot really of resources that are around. What is perhaps lacking is greater familiarity with those approaches. You mentioned stakeholder management, the ability also to cross boundaries between public and private sector, because what we heard is, if you do it right, you can mobilize a lot of private sector investment into those solutions, because the private sector has a responsibility towards managing water. They see it as a business risk in some cases. So in effect, it's an encouragement to really engage with all partners in the landscape, those who benefit, but also those who are likely to want, to need to deliver those measures, who would be farmers, forest managers, etc. So it's a shift in mindset, but as you said, it's not necessarily less or more difficult than planning grey infrastructure. Grey infrastructure on its own has its own complexities. It's just what people have been more used to doing, have been trained to doing. So it's great that on this very gender-balanced panel, I was happy to see, we've had, mix of experiences, both from, natural science to finance, etc. I like your image of the Rosetta Stone. We need to really work on language. NBS is a label, but, it's what has been helpful to raise awareness about these solutions, but really, as Stephen was saying, is about sound planning and doing what is right for the ecosystems and for the resilience of our watersheds and our water services. So thank you very much for your interest, and looking forward to the next session. Thanks.
Wow. So that was the sixth and final substantive session. We've covered some real ground across this last day and a half. I've really enjoyed that, so thanks to everyone. We're into the closing session now, and I'd like to invite Geraldo Daz from DG NEAR to come and moderate the closing session, please.
Thank you so much, Matthew, and ladies and gentlemen. So we're coming to the end of our 11th roundtable on the financing of water. Speaking of water, you may have noticed that in Brussels we are not particularly concerned with droughts these days. I hope you appreciate that we provided you with the true Belgian experience. More seriously, I want to thank you all for making it to Brussels. Again, I hope you appreciated those last 2 days of very intense and dynamic discussions. As Matthew just said, we covered a lot of ground, so I will not recap everything. But we mainly looked at the challenges, the opportunities, the new technologies, the new approaches for financing water. I would also like to thank all the speakers and panelists for sharing their experiences so generously with us. And of course, thank the audience for participating so actively to these discussions. We had over, I think, 100 participants in the room over the last 2 days, but also many more online, actually. And I would like to also thank our participants who were connecting over the last days. I would like maybe to highlight that much of the data and the topics that we discussed over the last days were based on the work that we are doing under EU for Environment, Water and Data program. And on that, I would like to thank all our partners, of course, OECD, UBA in Austria, the International Office of Water, UNECE, for participating to that work. And I'm very pleased to see that there's a real uptake of the work that we are doing. I would also like to take the opportunity to mention that next year we will have a new program starting, also covering the water aspects. But we will discuss about this probably in another setting. So before I give the floor for concluding remarks to our esteemed guests from Armenia, Georgia, and Moldova, I would like to recall that the World Bank is actually a founding partner of the Roundtable on Water Financing. And if he is in the room, I would like to invite Jason Liu, who's the global lead on water and finance at the World Bank, to come to stage and make some remarks. Jason, are you with us? Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Honorable Minister, distinguished guests, dear colleagues, on behalf of all the co-founders of this roundtable, including OECD, European Union, the Government of the Netherlands Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management, World Water Council, and the World Bank Group, I would like to thank you all for your support and active participation over the last 2 days. Thank you for sharing your valuable insights and experience. Our discussion is very timely, and as we see, the climate change has added additional stress to the water sector globally. Collectively, we have learned a lot from each other. I will not try to summarize the discussions since we have covered so many great topics. Just a few key takeaways and the reflections, I think that will prepare us very well for the upcoming One World Summit and the COP29, and our next Financing Water Roundtable in Jeddah in February 2025. First of all, the importance of enabling environment, creditworthiness of the utilities, and improving water governance through policies, institutions, and regulations. They are the preconditions for scaling up financing for water, as well as preconditions for private sector participations and private capital mobilizations. This also needs to be further supported by robust sector plannings, project preparations, and pipeline development to create more bankable projects. The second point is really about the water pricing and subsidy reform. We talked about a lot that yesterday. Water pricing and a cost-effective tariff are essential tools for managing demand, encouraging efficient use of water, and ensuring water sector long-term financial sustainability, and inviting private sector participations. Increasing economic efficiency of water use, water service deliveries, especially through non-revenue water reductions, should be prioritized. Many of these things are very easy to say than done. Sometimes it involves very tough, unpopular decisions. However, if we don't address those issues, we'll be talking about the same issues for a long time. The third point is really about a holistic and integrated approach. Financing plan of water services and sanitation should incorporate considerations for water resources management to ensure that investment in water services and sanitation do not compromise the availability and the quality of water uses for other critical areas such as irrigation and ecosystem services, vice versa. Nature-based solutions has been highlighted as an important approach to promote sustainable development. This has become increasingly critical given the climate change challenges that we are facing. Number 4, I'm really glad to see the great discussions on river basin management planning this morning. Globally, around 2/3 of the transboundary water do not have a cooperative management framework. By 2050s, more than 50% of the world population could live in the water-stressed transboundary basin compared to today. So transboundary cooperation framework and a sustained coordination mechanism is key for provision of global public goods, such as climate resilience, conflict preventions, and biodiversity preservations. Last but not least is the inspirations. It's very inspiring to hear the discussions about domestic financing and financial innovations, including impact investing we hear yesterday, new financial instruments such as green bond and a debt for nature swap for water sector. As Mikey from the government of Netherlands said yesterday in her opening remarks, we have to look beyond the traditional capital-intensive project finance structures or models for water projects. We have a lot of medium and smaller sized projects in water sector that need to get our attention to use microfinancing, to use results-based financing, catalytic use of the donor financing resources through blended finance, survivability gap funding, first loss guarantees, and risk-sharing facilities, so on and so forth. So all these are well aligned with the water security and the climate adaptation global challenge program that we recently launched at the World Bank. To have a more holistic and a longer-term approach to accelerate the water service deliveries, leveraging partnerships with all key stakeholders, including private sector investors, to support our clients to have a longer-term sustainability and a deeper impact. We touched on the water reuse, but we didn't get a time to have a deep dive. Another important that we didn't get a lot of time to cover is really the new technologies, the artificial intelligence, digital and the remote sensing technology in water sectors. This is probably also a good segue for us to pick it up on for the upcoming One Water Summit and the COP29, as I mentioned earlier. So before I conclude, I also want to welcome your suggestions and comments to help us to make the roundtable more productive and useful from your perspective. Lastly, I want to thank you again and look forward to continuing our partnership and engagement and welcoming you to the future roundtable and thematic discussions in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Liu. I would like to now call our esteemed guest from Armenia to come to the stage and maybe provide some concluding remarks.
Thank you, dear colleagues. And first of all, many thanks for this excellent roundtable discussion, which was organized and collect all the eastern part country representatives. We believe that this kind of platforms are ideal mechanisms indeed to exchange our experiences first. And coming back to the topic of this roundtable, financing, financing issues are really crucial sometimes for increase the effectiveness of all kind of investment in the water sector in general. It was also extremely important to update each other on recent developments in Eastern Partnership countries about harmonization of national policies to EU directives. We believe that very often these kind of harmonizations are playing decisive role for updating national policies in accordance to the European directives. In this context, it is good to see that there are significant progresses in all the Eastern Partnership countries. Besides discussing current developments and achievements, it is also very important during such participatory platforms to discuss also future frames and design of cooperation. And in this context, it should be mentioned that from our perspective, we think that the next upcoming period most probably should be continuation of the started cooperation, and also parallel, it should be very important to conduct intensive monitoring for all the planned activities and measures described and presented here in this meeting. On various topics and spheres, in particular water policy, water infrastructure, water supply and sanitation, irrigation, risk management are in high priority list of Armenian government. On behalf of Armenian delegation, once again, many thanks to all the colleagues involved in this organization, and we hope that with our joint effort, it will be possible to ensure sustainability and smooth continuation of started cooperation on national, regional, and international levels. Congrats to all of us in achievements presented here, and also we wish good luck in all our future initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your encouraging words. I would like to invite now maybe the representative from Georgia to come to stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. First of all, let me start thanking to our partners from OECD and from the European Commission for organization of this very interesting, useful, and timely meeting, I would say so, because it was extremely important and interesting for me personally also to hear those good examples and existing and ongoing reforms in the Eastern Partnership countries, the progress that has been achieved so far, and the new initiatives that are ongoing. I'm also extremely delighted that during these sessions there was quite a number of examples from Georgia that has been discussed as one of the successful examples in different areas, starting from wastewater infrastructure going to the policy reforms that is happening in the country, which we believe is extremely important because in these hard times of the climate change, water resources management and sustainable management of water resources is and should be #1 priority, not only for our region, but entirely, because it is not related only to the use of resources, but it is related to the security and to the social well-being of the country as such. And this is pretty much relevant, of course, for Georgia, because as I mentioned several times during my interventions, in the western part of Georgia, we face the challenges of floodings and natural disasters, and oppositely, in the eastern part of Georgia, we already face water scarcity due to the climate change. So it shows us the clear picture that the reforms like water policy reform is extremely important, that we have started by adoption of the new legislation. And I'm happy that together with me in our delegation, I have my colleague from the Ministry of Regional Development and Infrastructure. And why it is so important? Because once we're talking about water resources management, it has to be taken into consideration that the whole government approach is extremely important. So also at the planning process as well as at the implementation process, because river basin management plans are those plans who has to be implemented by different government authorities, and here the consensus and prioritization of the measures are extremely important among also those important government agencies. We also understand that in the reform process of water management systems in our country, we take basically into consideration the best European practices that exists for many, many years already in many EU countries, but we also need to think about our country-own specific approaches based on the challenges that we face in our countries. Here, again, experience sharing is very important, and it was for me personally interesting to hear those challenges and important developments in Romania, for instance, and similarities that we share in terms of water resources management. So that's also important to be taken into consideration. There was a quite interesting session on nature-based solutions, and I'm delighted and happy that we, together with the OECD, we work on the nature-based solution assessment that has been done for Georgia, and I believe that it will be an important piece of document for the future decision-making process and also future planning process of our river basin management plans. The progress is extremely significant. The awareness is raising about the importance of integrated water management and river basin management systems in our country. We also understand that a lot more investment is needed, a lot more awareness raising is needed, and one of the most important aspects to be highlighted is the distribution of water resources among different sectors, so-called water allocation. Because, for instance, I represent the ministry which actually is responsible for environment, climate change, and agriculture at the same time. So these river basin management plans are a good tool to discuss also how these water resources can be allocated between different sectors of economy, just to avoid the future conflicts between those water users and those sectors of economy which play its own role in each country. So this is also important to be taken into consideration. Georgia, of course, is committed to continue its path towards the EU integration process to implement the water sector reform as successfully as possible. We are developing monitoring systems, we are developing data collection systems, laboratory systems. A lot has been already established and has been done throughout the country, but of course there are many more that has to be done. And in this process, the support that we receive from European Union, from our international partners, from developing partners like AFD, KfW, and many other, World Bank, and many other international partners, and those investments that has been that is happening in the country is extremely important for improving improving infrastructure and for improving the lives of the citizens of the country and the social well-being of the citizens of Georgia, because at the end of the day, sufficient and efficient water resources management is pretty much related to rural development and offering the equal opportunities to those who are living in the rural areas of our country. So, and as a last point I want to highlight is the importance of the policy dialogues between different government authorities. And we have a very good example of our national policy dialogue, which we organize every year. And I have to say that interest and participation from different stakeholders are increasing, which means that interest towards the good management of water resources, towards sharing the good practices in this respect is increasing, and it is important. And last point, as we're talking about the regional cooperation and Eastern Partnership countries, we'll understand that transboundary cooperation is very important between the countries, but here we need to take into consideration the fact that we need to have the efficient implementation of those water resources management reforms in each country, starting from data analysis, going to monitoring, laboratory capacities, experience sharing, etc., to avoid any conflicts that might be related to water management. So this is very important, because we know the successful examples of transboundary cooperation, but we also know some of the unsuccessful examples of transboundary cooperation. So we need to be we need to plan in advance well these cooperation aspects in order to take countries' specificities into consideration. Thank you very much once again, and hope to see you soon. And yeah, that was a very interesting and useful discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Deputy Minister, for the excellent recap of all the issues we have discussed over the last 2 days, but also for stressing your commitment to our joint cooperation in the field of water. I would like now to call Ms. Paula Tatamirov from the government of Moldova to come to stage. Thank you.
Good afternoon, honored audience, dear partners and colleagues. On behalf of the Ministry of Environment of the Republic of Moldova, we greatly appreciate the opportunity to participate in this event, which provided us with useful information, examples of good practices and models that our country could follow. So, as my colleagues mentioned yesterday, we are in the process of implementing EU directives, carrying out a series of reforms which require both institutional capacities and considerable financial resources. Also, I'd like to mention that water resources remain a priority for us, and it is very important to identify the right solutions, taking into account all aspects, including the impact of climate change. We have learned that economic instruments must be applied in such a way that they fulfill their basic role, so cost recovery, which is still quite difficult. Infrastructure need to be rebuilt in the resilient way to avoid further losses. Also, transboundary cooperation remains a priority, and the partnerships are important at all stages. As the cost of water will become increasingly expensive, we remain committed to achieving reforms and continue to count on the support of development partners to successfully implement all commitments. We are aware that reforms take time, effort, and finance resources, but they are absolutely necessary. Also, we strongly believe that these 2 days, full of discussions and constructive presentations, help us to understand how to strengthen our efforts and capacities in the field of water resources. I deeply appreciate our shared involvement and contribution throughout this event. So together we have contributed to the success of this event. So thank you very much and best wishes to all in achieving our common goals.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tamirov, and thank you for your words of appreciation and for, again, your commitments to our joint cooperation and work. I think this is almost the end. I think Matthew wanted to say a few last words before we close, definitely. So, Matthew, please.
Many thanks, Gerard. So really, I just wanted to say thanks to colleagues. I've worked in water for a long time, and it has a real family feel as a community, those working in water, and it's been a real pleasure to get together these last couple of days with old friends that we've been working with for a long time on these issues, and also some new friends as well. A meeting like this takes a lot of effort and energy, so I wanted to acknowledge the significant OECD team that have worked on this meeting. Lupita, Jan, Guy are in the room. Ord, Delia, Sophie also in the room, and online we've got Laura, we've got Sama, and many other colleagues as well. It's a big effort. I also wanted to acknowledge the support from DG NEO, with Angela, our program manager, and Gerard. We've had good vision and support to pull this together, and identifying speakers and thematics and the session theme, so thanks for that. And from DG Environment, Karin has been such a fan of our work and has contributed to all our meetings online, and it's the first time we've got to meet in person, so great support from the Commission. EU for Environment, our programme has contributed a lot of the discussion points to this meeting, and Tamara and Francesca from UNECE, Alexander from the Environment Agency Austria, and Yannick from International Office of Water of France are all here, and it's a super cooperation on this project, looking at water from all sides, and it's really encouraging to hear that hopefully we can continue with this work in the future. Behind the scenes, we have a lot of country representatives as well that support our work. Vargan from Armenia is here, Rafik from Azerbaijan, Zurab from Georgia. Our wonderful colleague Natalia in Ukraine is online, and Andrei from Moldova as well. It's a super team. And I wanted to just recognize the translators as well for their support. So really, thank you everyone. And the technical team at the back, these hybrid meetings are very complicated, we know. So thank you for everything you've done as well. It's a super team effort. So thank you everyone.
All right, this is it. Thank you again. Thank you again for joining. And safe travel back to your homes, and thank you again for coming. Bye-bye.